Hi and welcome back to the channel, and in today's episode let's see if we can get this thing running properly. Okay, so it's Monday morning and we had the safari rally on the weekend. We'll get a video together for that shortly and through. Anyway, back to the work on this car. So if you haven't checked out episode 1 yet of getting this thing going and running, then it's worth checking it out just so you know where we're up to. Today we're going to get on and get a few things done and make sure that it actually runs properly. It's a bit of a backwards process because I've got to start first with putting the radiator back in and getting the engine running, and then that may all have to come out again and be replaced. There's a few other bits and pieces to be done. However, before we do any more work on it, we've got to make sure the engine's good and go from there. So we'll start with the first segment, which is all about the boost. Before we get too much further, the first thing I'm going to do is sort out this boost hoses. The plumbing here is a bit average. Now, I'll need to do a video on this at some point in the future. I think it definitely deserves a video to talk about getting more power out of a Subaru and how you go about it. This car has had a boost T fitted to it, and to cut a long story short, it's a bit of a no-no. What happens is that boost is air pressure. You need three things to run the engine. You need fuel, you need air, and you need spark, which is usually referred to as timing. And basically, you need to have the correct combination of those three all the time. A, for emissions point of view if you're driving on the road, and B, for the longevity of your engine, to make the engine run properly. Too much fuel, you get black smoke, rich, fouls plugs up. Too little fuel or too much air, and the engine overheats internally, and you melt pistons and rings, and also blow head gaskets. And why am I talking about that? Well, basically what happens is when you wind up the boost, which means wind up the air going into the engine, the air pressure going into the engine, it creates more air than potentially the engine management system, particularly the factory ECU, can handle, and then you have a situation where the engine is running too lean. Now, these older ECUs don't have a great deal of protection in them, so they will allow you to overboost them effectively, and unfortunately that causes a condition which could end up with melted pistons, blown head gaskets, broken rings, etc., etc., and probably a rod knock. So putting a boost T in, what you're doing is effectively just changing the air pressure into the engine without counteracting that with the correct amount of fuel and sorting out the timing to get the balance correct. So we're going to take this out. The car has, Subarus have a factory boost controller, and we need to leave the boost control in the hands of the ECU, so to speak, to make sure that it runs the correct mixtures and does what it needs to do. So let's get on and take this out, which should be a fairly straightforward process. Now, there is another problem here that I can see we will come up against, and it needs a restrictor pill in there. These turbos have a tiny little pill in the line. It's a little metal hole in the line to make sure that the car runs correctly, and it does get the correct boost, and that is missing. So we will also have to sort that out at some point, but in the meantime, okay, let's see what we got going on in here. Okay, so manifold going into the boost pressure sensor, which should be then coming across to the map sensor, which has been unbolted for some reason, so I have to sort that out. Yep, so that's under control. And we've also got the boost controller, boost coming in there. Okay, so that's all back to where it should be by the looks of that. There's a few hose clamps missing off bits and pieces in here, and I can also see it's going to be a power steering pump or an alternator out to get in there and sort that out. One of the breather hoses underneath is also broken, which is not good because air will get in that's not supposed to, which is definitely not going to help that. And that hose is split. All right. hopefully the camera picks that up. There's a lot of oil that has gone inside that intercooler from the turbo, so the engine's been doing a bit of heavy breathing. Behind here, the breather hose to the PCV valve is also off. The problem with these hoses is that they get brittle over time with the heat and the rubber, and it's pretty easy to break them. This one's actually gone rock hard, which is not ideal. All right. Okay, it's back on, but oh, that was a bit... That went back on under protest. All right, it's done. So, whilst I had a couple of minutes just to sort a few other bits and pieces out, I'm going to stop the camera. I'm just trying to get the intercooler bracket back on. I've also discovered that all the clips, what's going on there? For some reason, I don't know what's happened there. All the fuel injector clips are broken, so the harness is actually not plugged into the fuel injectors. They're at least free to move around on there. We just started this morning on item 20 on the list already. One of the things the customer did say that they, along its history, is one of the reasons that it got taken off the road or unregistered was because it just wouldn't run properly. And given the number of bits and pieces that I've already found this morning with it that need some attention, it's probably not surprising that it hasn't run properly. Both of these injector plugs, the clips on the loom are okay, but the little tabs underneath on both of those injectors are broken off. So there's a little trick you can use with some thread tape, where you just get a bit of thread tape and just gently wind a bit over a broken plug. It's not the easiest place to get to in there. You've got to be careful that you don't cover the contacts with the tape either. Just wrap the tape around. And then the tape helps to hold the plug on. Okay, so that's that one done. That's quite secure now. Now I'm doing this, however, these injectors may need to come out anyway to be cleaned. However, I don't want anything falling off or giving us other problems to resolve while we're trying to diagnose this thing. So we'll try and get as much of it as correct as possible, even if we do have to pull it off again. Okay. So on the last video I talked about this being corroded out. I cleaned it all out and resealed the top plate. This was the problem here. It had a pinhole where it was corroded through, so we've cleaned that up and welded it. Luckily this is steel and this is aluminium, and that's part of the reason why this dissimilar metals, you get a bit of corrosion in there out of that. It's not in the best shape. Unfortunately, we just don't have a spare tank in the workshop at the moment. I think we've used them all up. So this one will be okay to go back on for the time being anyway. We'll just try and... Right. So that's the breather situation sorted out. So now all the engine breathing is sorted out correctly. Hopefully that will help a bit with this whole running issue. I had to make cut a piece of tube and make a piece up to go in there at the bottom there and cut the old hose back, which had split back probably about 30 mil and had fallen off. So that was an alternator out job, so that's what's just been done. Now, something that I do want to talk about now is this, air filters. It's very common for people to fit a pod filter to a Subaru. They fit it to a whole bunch of people have fit them to a lot of cars, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about these things. Basically, there's a lot of belief that fitting one of these is a lot better for your engine, gives more airflow in and makes more power, and that is not necessarily true. Basically, the factory spends millions of dollars developing their cars and into research, and the factory air box that they put in is actually very good. It's a bit the same as intercoolers, and that's again for another day. But it actually works quite efficiently, and they can flow quite a bit of air without too much drama. So general advice for customers is to retain the factory air box, of which this one doesn't have one, and run the factory air box in the car and a paper air filter element rather than a pod filter, if your engine's all standard and running standard engine management. And one of the reasons for this is the airflow meters in these Subarus are not brilliant. They use what's called a hot wire system in them. So they have a very, very fine wire inside here, which I don't know if the camera is going to pick that up or not. And it's heated. And as air rushes past that, it changes the resistance, and the computer uses that resistance figure to calculate the fuel and air going into the engine. And what happens is a lot of pod filters are oiled, so they have impregnated with oil. That's how they are one of the methods of keeping dust and dirt out of them. And those molecules of oil get sucked through from the inside of the air filter through into the airflow meter, and you've got a tiny wire in there that's very hot. And so those molecules stick to that hot wire, and they effectively either burn that hot wire out, they create, I suppose, a miniature fire, for want of a better word, and burn that wire out, or the molecules get stuck to that hot wire, and then once that happens, the resistance readings are no longer correct, the computer isn't getting the right information, and then it doesn't fuel the engine properly and causes a whole bunch of grief. Can cause misfire, loss of power. Worst case scenario can cause lunched engines, leaning out, fuel mixtures, particularly under boost, gives a lot of trouble. So the customer did say in this particular car that was having trouble where it wouldn't rev over 4,000 RPM, it was giving trouble, and there's every possibility that that is down to the airflow meter. So what I'm going to try and do here is this airflow meter, this air filter, I'm going to take this off and check and see whether it's oiled or not. It looks like it may have been. We'll run without the air filter on there, and I'm going to try and use some airflow cleaner and clean this meter and see if we can get it to run correctly. And problem with this is if you unplug it, it will show a check engine light, but quite often if there is a fault inside there, it actually won't show a check engine light that it's getting incorrect readings. It just takes those readings as what it is and processes that. So we'll see what happens. Worst case scenario, if we cannot get this airflow meter to work, then it's going to have to go in the bin, and unfortunately it means a brand new airflow meter for it. Some of the later ones have got a cassette in there that you can slide a new airflow, just the module in. Regardless, it's a bit of an expensive exercise, so it is what it is. Anyway, you can run pod filters dry. And if you are not running an airflow meter, if you've got aftermarket management where the airflow meter has been deleted and it's running off map sensor and using other ways to calculate the air and fuel, then you can run a pod filter, and in those sort of situations there is some very minor advantage to running those. Anyway, let's get on and see what we can do with this. Oh yeah, and looking in there, I don't know whether the camera will pick that up or not. However, that's got a film of oil on it. That's oily. So yep, and I can see even with the lights not that bright in here, yeah, that airflow meter's got lots of, yeah, that's got a fair bit of oil that's gone down inside that. Off camera, I have got the dump pipe in the car now, that's bolted in. No whole exhaust system, but the dump pipe's back on, which connects up the oxygen sensor. Also, the radiator is back in the car and all reconnected and sorted out. There was a strip thread, actually a snapped off bolt here on the power steering line, so got that sorted out, and brackets all in. Also resealed the power steering pump reservoir, so that is good to go. Tidied up a few other little bits and pieces with hoses and wires. So now we're ready to put a bit of water in it. To start with, it's not going to get coolant in there, it's only going to get some tap water in it. Just to make sure that this thing is going to be okay, and then we should be able to fire it up and let it idle up for a while and just make sure that it's going to run. Fingers crossed that we've got everything sorted out now that needs to be. Fuel pump primed. Righto, that sounds promising. At the moment, I'm just checking to make sure there's no leaks anywhere around the engine bay. Off camera, we got a whole bunch of other stuff done. We started with rebuilding the front end, so some new drive shafts, rack ends, tie rod ends to go in there, ball joints and bits and pieces were sorted out and all reassembled. So that was the front end and the front suspension all sorted out. Also, we discovered the airflow meter. We had had a crack at cleaning it, however, it was beyond that and had to replace it. Very luckily, we managed to find a second-hand one, which actually worked out quite well. And we also got an airbox as well. It's not shown in the video here, but we got a factory airbox to fit it. We also had to remove the extractors that were on the car. They were actually melting some of the wiring loom under there, and they were leaking pretty badly. So the customer found a set of standard exhaust manifolds. We got that back on and plopped the turbo back onto there and sorted out a whole bunch of gaskets and bits and pieces under there. So we actually got it back to basically to standard now. So it should have been a good thing. And then we went to do something simple, replace the fuel pump at the customer's request, when we found this. Yeah. So we're going to call this episode here because we've got a fair bit to do now. The tank's going to have to come out and all that underneath to replace that, and it'll have to have a new fuel tank in it. It's in a bad state, and then we can go for episode 3, and hopefully then everything will be all sorted out. So thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this episode of 97 WRX Will It Run. Look forward to bringing you episode 3. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And we'll catch you again soon. Cheers.